Much has been written about the persecution of witches in the period between the Renaissance and the end of the 18th century. Yet it is still difficult to understand how these atrocities could have happened. At least 60,000 people, as many as 3/4 of whom were women, were forced into absurd confessions of witchcraft and were then horribly killed. Starting in the 15th century, tens of thousands of witches were executed. They were considered secret devil worshippers who indulged in carnal lust and cannibalism during nightly rituals. What persuaded people to hunt down innocent men and women and condemn them based on nothing but falsehoods and myths? Until about the year 1000 AD, the Roman Catholic Church denied the existence of witches and wizards. It was even forbidden to believe in them at all. At the end of the first millennium, however, the Vatican changed its view. Witches could from now on be punished for practicing magic and witchcraft. Prison sentences putting people on water and bread for a period from 1 to 7 years were pronounced. But the fear of demonic influence increased over the centuries. In a papal bull from 1233, Gregory IX described the bestialities that took place during nighttime rituals performed by witches and wizards. The Pope obtained this information from the fanatic Konrad von Marburg, whom he had appointed as Inquisitor in Germany 2 years earlier. Soon certain religious groups were singled out, among whom the Waldensians, who were members of a French-founded Christian movement who sought to follow Christ in poverty and simplicity. The Waldensian movement spread outside of France, their members living their lives as true Christians. They rejected the debauched lifestyle of the clergy without questioning the established dogmas. The Church, however, forced the Waldensians to return to the Roman Catholic faith and to turn in their fellow Waldensians. In 1252, Pope Innocent IV authorized inquisitors to use ingenious instruments of torture to force alleged heretics to confess. The Waldensians were fanatically pursued, and thousands of them were slaughtered. At the beginning of the 14th century, even the formidable Knights Templar, an order who combined religious authority with wealth and military force, were destroyed by King Philip IV of France, who accused them of religious and sexual crimes. King Philip of France decided to crush the Knights Templar in the hope that their vast wealth would help him pay off his war debts. Under pressure from Philip, Pope Clement V was forced to dissolve the order. During the 14th century, many so-called heretics were fiercely persecuted. Jews also suffered en masse. They were accused of spreading the plague by sprinkling a poisonous powder in the water sources. But around 1400, a far more serious threat was discovered by the Roman Catholics: witches. The belief in witches did not stem from the illiterate population, but arose as knowledgeable authorities gradually combined a number of elements, such as rumors of pagan goddess worshipping, ritual sacrificing, and the rise of ritual magic. All kinds of so-called sorcery and belief in women with evil powers were also gradually placed under the same heading: witchcraft. Some historians have assumed that the first witch trials took place as early as 1335. However, it is certain that in 1484, Pope Innocent VIII gave the go-ahead for a massive persecution of witches that would last for more than 2 centuries. His papal bull, Summis Desiderantes Affectibus, was included 2 years later in the book called the Malleus Maleficarum, which is also known as the Witch's Hammer. The Witch's Hammer was the first manual for witch hunters, which found wide circulation thanks to the invention of the printing press. The heresy hunt was gradually replaced by the witch hunt. Individuals accused of witchcraft were treated even more cruelly than heretics. They usually had no chance to escape being executed. The accused were often elderly, single women who depended in part on their neighbors for their livelihood. Those who looked somewhat fearsome, behaved oddly, and were prone to stand up for themselves were easy victims. Midwives and practitioners of folk medicine were also often suspected of witchcraft. In rural areas, belief in witches had been widespread for centuries. However, it was risky to accuse someone on vague or unfounded suspicions. For example, the judge could order that the accused be thrown handcuffed into the water. If she sank, her innocence was proven and the accuser was punished. With the introduction of Inquisitorial justice, which became widespread in Europe in the 16th century, it became much easier to convict suspected witches. Suspects would be reported to independent authorities who then launched their own investigations. Defendants were convicted if 2 eyewitnesses had seen their crime or if the accused themselves confessed. In cases of witchcraft, there usually were no eyewitnesses, magical attributes were rarely found, and one often could not even determine whether a crime had indeed been committed. Therefore, authorities made inventive use of torture devices to extract a confession. Initially, torture was regulated. It was forbidden to bring suspects to the torture chamber more than once. Suggestive questions were not allowed, a confession had to be repeated outside of the torture chamber, and the facts revealed had to be verified. However, these rules soon were forgotten because judges did not want to risk leaving a witch at large. The judges assumed for certain that all the accused were guilty and assumed that God would give those who were innocent the strength they needed to endure the torture. Judges were not primarily interested in the harm the accused had done to their neighbors, but in their connections to the devil. The suspects were urged to identify accomplices, sometimes setting off a chain reaction that claimed dozens of lives. Such panicked witch hunts only ended when people began to realize that more and more people were being charged who did not fit the stereotypical image of a witch. Certain suspects confessed without being tortured. In psychiatric circles, it is assumed that some of these individuals were psychologically disturbed. However, most so-called voluntary confessions were made after the accused was shown the available instruments of torture, they were sometimes not allowed to sleep, false promises were made, and suggestive questions were asked. Either way, many convicted victims would have been wise to confess right away, as it would have spared them much suffering. The witch craze only calmed down towards the end of the 17th century when the intellectual climate changed. An industrial worldview emerged in which there was much less room for dogmas and demons. Higher standards of evidence began to be required in the administration of justice, and resistance to the torture chamber grew. The death of a cow or some other misfortune was no longer sufficient to charge someone with witchcraft. In order to gain a better understanding of the history of the witch craze, it is helpful that the Malleus Maleficarum, which for the longest time was only available in Latin, has finally been translated into other languages. However, anyone who is aware of the atrocities committed against tens of thousands of innocent people cannot possibly read this book without having mixed feelings. Thank you for watching.